One of the events that took place, God, it was over 50 years ago now. May 1974. The dateline was South Central LA. And of course, if you remember back then, we had the so called SLA shootout, and that's what it was. It was a shootout in the heart of the South Central ghetto. Um, it began in the early afternoon. Um, it was a fierce gun battle between the LAPD and what was thought to have been mostly all of the SLA. Remember the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army, the terrorist organization, the group that was responsible for the kidnap of Patty Hearst that happened earlier in the year, February 4th, 1974. Of course, they were also responsible for the murder of the Oakland school superintendent back in November of the previous year, Dr. Marcus Foster. But this was a part of that really, really crazy, years long story regarding Patty Hearst. And it was a Friday afternoon. It happened in a cul-de-sac down on near 160th Avenue and Crenshaw. And the gun battle, the gunfight between the occupants of this house and the LAPD was very, very tough and fierce. And soon after the gunfight, a fire erupted inside the little bungalow. And a lot of people, lots of people, thought that Patty Hearst was in that house. Turns out she was not. Turns out she was out of the house and probably somewhere, nobody knows exactly who or where. But most of the SLA had seen their demise that night, including the leader, the so called Sin Q, aka Donald DeFreeze, and Nancy Ling Perry, and all of the miscreants involved in the kidnapping of Patty Hearst. Who could forget the bank robbery in San Francisco? Who could forget which Patty Hearst took part in? Who could forget the robbery, the held up at the sporting goods store, Mel's? And then you have the shootout in Los Angeles. We would know about a year and a half later that Patty Hearst, along with Bill and Emily Harris, were captured at a little house on Moore Street in San Francisco. And she, of course, was taken into custody. She was given legal representation by a very prominent attorney, Bailey, F. Lee Bailey, who's paid millions and millions of dollars to forge a defense for Patty Hearst. He lost this case, and Patty Hearst was convicted. Very, very poor situation, a legal malpractice, if you want my opinion, and many others. Nevertheless, Patty Hearst's sentence was commuted by President Carter. But today I want to elect on the May shootout. It was a very, very emotional Friday, the weekend, I believe, before Memorial Day. And you had the shootout in LA, and all the stations, both in Los Angeles, for that matter, around the country, of course, San Francisco, descended upon South Central LA. You have this back and forth. And very, very tough situation, very extremely emotional. And of course, you got to remember, and most of you do, the Hearst family didn't know whether or not their daughter was in that house. And if you recall, months before what happened in LA. You had the press conferences outside the estate in Hillsborough. You had the back and forth between the cops and what was happening. You had the tapes that were part of that story that were delivered to the radio station in Berkeley. You had all this drama taking place, and then we have this big shootout in LA. It was unbelievable. It was tense, it was dramatic, it was haunting, and a part of Bay Area lore. And it wouldn't be the only big deal in the 70s, but in my opinion, one of the most powerful. Of course, a few years later, you had years prior, you had the zebra murders, you had the Milk Moscone assassination in 78. You had, of course, but a week later, you had the Jonestown, Guyana situation, which was absolutely haunting. But Patty Hearst was a story of its own. From her kidnapping on the night of February 4th, 1974, was a Monday night. She was abducted at her Benvenue Avenue, Berkeley apartment where she was watching a TV show with her boyfriend, Stephen Weed, and the SLA members, Sin Q, a.k.a. Donald DeFreeze, and Nancy Ling Perry, and all the miscreants kidnap Patty Hearst, take her from her Berkeley apartment over to San Francisco, where they locked her in a closet. Of course, we would have the bank robbery weeks later at the Hibernia Bank on 46th Avenue. And I forgot the cross street, but it was out in the outer Sunset. And then, the subsequent tapes. Mom, Dad, remember that? I'm Tanya. I'm no longer Patty Hearst. I'm Tanya. And then we had, of course, the shootout in LA. I can never, ever, ever forget it. It was a Friday. NBC, CBS, ABC. You had no Fox. Of course, you didn't have CNN. You had the 3 over-the-air networks. Radio, everybody was glued to their television set watching this back and forth gun battle, soon to become a fiery situation in this little bungalow deep in the heart of the ghetto of South Central LA at a time when this story was only in its infancy still, would later end to some degree a year and a half later, when, of course, as I described and noted, Patty Hearst was arrested, taken into custody along with Bill and Emily Harris on September the 20th, 1975. But the shootout in LA, I know a lot of you probably watched it, have memories. We'll never forget that. It's, again, folks, 51 years ago this month. Doesn't seem that long. Seems like only yesterday, but God, half a century. Oh my goodness.